In this video, we'll go over the 10 best hand traps that have effects related to the battle phase. And at number 10, we have KURIBOH. This card has the effect where if your opponent declares an attack, you can discard this card from your hand to change that monster to defense position, thereby stopping the attack and making it easier to beat over on your next turn. This card never really saw any play in the TCG, but is currently one of the most popular hand traps in Duel Links. And the reason for this is because stopping one attack in Duel Links is a lot more important than stopping one attack in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's because they only have 3 monster zones instead of 6. Only 3 monsters have the opportunity to attack per turn, and the amount of attack stoppers from the hand are just very limited in that game as well. And because there's lots of spell and trap card removal, KURIBOH is one of the only ways to reliably prevent an OTK. It probably wouldn't see anywhere near as much play if any of the other cards I'm about to talk about were available in Duel Links. And at number 9, we have Ghostrick Jack Frost. This card is similar to KURIBOH, except it also special summons itself from your hand and flips your opponent's card face down, which just makes it much better than KURIBOH, as out of that exchange, you get a monster on the field to potentially stop another attack, and force the attacking card face down, which gets rid of a lot of lingering effects, destroys any equipped cards to the monster, and prevents it from being used for extra deck plays. This card actually did see a lot of side deck usage in a couple of formats, and obviously saw play in Ghostrick decks, but those were never super competitive. But the ones that were, focused on the level 1 engine, so of course Jack Frost got played in that as well. Now, the reason this card has fallen out of use is because Link monsters cannot go into defense position, or face down for that matter, so all Link monsters are immune to this card, which really hampers its viability, and that's why it's only at number 9 on this list. At number 8, we have Psyframe Gear Beta. Out of all of the Psyframe cards, this one doesn't really see play outside of Psyframe decks, but what it does is if you don't control any monsters and your opponent declares an attack, you can special summon this card as well as a Psyframe driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard, and then destroy the attacking monster and end the battle phase. So, you get 2 monsters from that exchange, you get to destroy your opponent's monster, and end the entire battle phase. All of that is really good. You literally go +2 in card economy off of that whole exchange. The bad thing though, is that this card and the monster you special summon from the deck are both banished during the end phase. So, if used during your opponent's turn, like it's intended, as your opponent can't really attack you during your turn, you won't be able to use the 2 cards you put on the field for any kind of extra deck plays, since this card is also a tuner, unless you're running the field spell card specific to the archetype that allows you to go into synchro summons during your opponent's turn. Other than that, it's still a nice attack stopper, but you do have to play a high level vanilla monster in order to use this card in your deck, which does hamper the card's overall versatility. And at number 7, we have Rainbow KURIBOH, probably one of the better KURIBOH monsters in the game. This card has 2 battle phase effects. The first one is a hand trap effect, just a little tangent. In Yu-Gi-Oh, they call anything which can be used from your hand during your opponent's turn a hand trap, regardless of the fact if it's a trap card or not, in case you're confused why all the cards on this list have been monsters so far. Anyways, when your opponent declares an attack, you can equip this card from your hand to the attacking monster, and it makes it so the monster can no longer attack. So, just straight up prevents one monster from attacking forever, as long as this card's on the field anyway, which is a pretty good stopper. It also has a graveyard effect, where if your opponent declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from the graveyard, but then it's banished when it leaves the field. This is obviously intended to stop the attack from happening, as it can block the direct attack with its body. But there are ways you can gain advantage off of that special summon, so it's a pretty good graveyard effect. Rainbow KURIBOH has 2 good, versatile effects, and that's why this card saw a lot of play in past meta decks, even if it doesn't see very much play today. And at number 6, we have TRAGOEDIA. Now, this card has 4 effects, and one of the effects is that if you take battle damage, you can special summon this card from your hand. Now, the way this effect was used the most was after your opponent had already attacked with all of their monsters, you would special summon TRAGOEDIA after the last attack. So it wasn't really used to actually stop any further attacks, and that's because of its other effects. Now, The other 3 effects of this card were a gain 600 attack and defense for each card in your hand. It could copy the level of one monster in your graveyard, and you could discard a monster from your hand to take control of a monster your opponent controlled permanently with the same level as the discarded monster. So back in the Exceeds era, this card was incredibly versatile in pretty much any deck, since it could become any level you wanted by copying a level in the graveyard. And that's why people would wait to use it after the last attack, or it could be used to block further attacks in an emergency. And it was the versatility of this card that allowed you to use it to save yourself, or to be used to further your own plays during your next turn, that allowed this card to see a lot of success, and even appeared on the ban list for a long time at semi-limited. You may have noticed, a lot of these cards are on the list for being very versatile, i.e. usable in a lot of situations in a lot of different kinds of decks. TRAGOEDIA was at one point one of the most played hand traps, but it basically never sees any play today though. And at number 5, we have Honest, a hand trap so good that any hand trap which increases the attack of a monster is referred to as having an Honest-like effect. So what this card did was, if a light attribute monster you controlled did battle with an opponent's monster, you could discard this card during the damage step so that your light monster could gain attack equal to the current attack of your opponent's monster. Which was really useful if your opponent was using some kind of damage increaser, because it would just copy whatever your opponent's monster's current attack was, instead of, say, your opponent's original attack, which is what most cards that work this way would do, making Honest really good on that front, and the fact that you can activate it during the damage step whenever you wanted, meaning you can activate it last and make sure your monster came out on top in that battle. Its damage increase lasted until the end of the turn, so it was really good on cards that could attack multiple times. Oh, and one other thing, kind of a big deal, you could use multiple Honest effects for the same battle, since it's not once per turn, which means you could win the game if you used triple Honest on just one attack and you were attacking into a strong enough monster. And because of this, Honest was actually on the ban list at limited and semi-limited for a really long time, and only came off the ban list once battle traps stopped being relevant, because modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is about destroying your opponent's cards before 2 monsters ever do battle. But even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Honest is still considered a good card, even if it's not really played. And at number 4, we have Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness. This card has the effect where if you control no cards on your side of the field, which means monsters and spell and traps, then if you take damage from your opponent, you can activate one of its 2 effects based on the kind of damage you took. If you took effect damage, you can special summon this card from your hand and then inflict effect damage to your opponent equal to the damage you took. And if it was battle damage, you get to special summon this card and a token, whose attack and defense are equal to the amount of battle damage you took. And this card was so good when it came out that it was limited immediately and never saw play at 3 until years later when the power creep of the game got to the point where it wasn't a big deal anymore. Basically, Gorz was so good that it changed the way people attacked during the battle phase. If people are attacking their opponent directly, the best practice is to attack with your lowest attack monster first and then your highest attack monster last. And the reason you do this is because if you attack with the strongest monster first and they had a Gorz in their hand, they just special summon a Gorz token with a higher attack than all your other monsters could beat over, thereby ending the battle phase and giving them a strong token that can beat over all of your monsters, or at the very least match your opponent's strongest monster. And Gorz himself also had really good stats for a hand trap that could bring himself out in this way, as both of its attack and defense were over 2500, which is a wall usually only surpassed by monsters over level 7, unless you have an especially strong level 6 or lower monster, or a monster of a rank or link rating equivalent. And at number 3, we have Swift Scarecrow. This card's effect is pretty simple. If your opponent declares a direct attack, you can discard this card in order to negate the attack and end the battle phase. Cards that are able to stop an entire battle phase while only using one card to do it are pretty strong in stall decks. So Swift Scarecrow is almost always played in any kind of deck that's trying to stall out, especially if it can be used from the hand. They don't have to worry about it being destroyed on the field during your opponent's turn. And there's also no other catches or restrictions to it. You don't need to control a certain amount of spell or traps, you don't need to be able to special summon, Just as long as you have this card in your hand and your opponent's declaring a direct attack, you can just stop them for the turn. And it's these simple effects that are very versatile that are usually the strongest. And at number 2, we have Battle Fader. This card's effect is exactly the same as Scarecrow, except in order to stop the battle phase, you have to special summon this card from your hand. So it has all of the benefits of Swift Scarecrow, but it also gives you a monster to use for extra deck plays during your next turn. Back in the days of Frog Monarch decks, this card was a staple since those decks couldn't play face down spell and traps, as it would allow them to stall out a battle phase as well as give them tribute fodder for their monarchs. This card is also a staple in stall decks even today, as it doesn't require other monsters or setups, and just like Scarecrow, it's the simplicity of this card that makes it so good, even if it's not as strong or game-changing as Gorz or Honest. The only problem with it though, is if you cannot special summon this card, because your opponent is preventing special summons for some reason, then you can't use its effect, which is why some stall decks run Swift Scarecrow over Battle Fader if they have to make a choice. But in most situations you will be able to special summon, and getting a monster on the field as well as into the battle phase is just more advantage than Swift Scarecrow. And at number 1, we have Evenly Matched. This is probably the only battle trap on this list that sees heavy use in today's meta, and is also the only actual trap card. And what this card does is at the end of the battle phase, your opponent must banish cards they control face down, so that they control the same number of cards on the field as you do. And if you control no cards on your side of the field, you can activate this card from your hand. So there are 2 common ways to use this card. One of them is at the end of your opponent's turn when you have no cards on the field. You can just use this card from your hand and your opponent will have to banish everything except for 1 card, because this card counts itself as the amount of cards you control, which essentially is a board wipe, as almost no cards have protection from being banished face down, except for cards that can just negate the effect or are unaffected by card effects in general. And the other use of this card is during your turn, where players will enter their own battle phase with no cards on the field, and then just use this card at the end of the battle phase in order to banish all but one of your opponent's cards, and then set up their board during their main phase too. So if you're going against a really hard to break board, you can basically just give up your battle phase in order to get rid of all of your opponent's problem monsters, and then set up your board before you end your turn. This card is the ultimate comeback card and is really strong, and the fact that you can use it from your hand is just icing on the cake. And a battle trap needs to be at least as strong as Evenly Matched to see play in the current meta, which is why this card easily takes the number 1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. If you think I missed any other really good battle phase hand traps, or have ideas for videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.